Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. It's that time of year when so much in our gardens is singing, you know. Here in the border at the moment, Crocosmia looking fantastic. These lovely laryngiums just popping their way through the border. And I know you can't, but I can smell that Rosa Munster's wood. And that has been a star for months on end now. But I've been slightly invaded by lupin aphid and also powdery mildew. The aphid are starting to disappear slowly because I've got a few ladybirds in here starting to have a good feed. But the mildew really has given this plant a proper mullering. So if I cut this back really hard, it might look a little harsh, but I'll give it a good soaking. And within a couple of weeks, you'll find that the new growth will start to appear. And also it means that the aphids will not travel to any other lupins in the garden. So hopefully that way I'll keep on top of it. And the whole thing will look an awful lot better. I'm getting covered in aphid as I'm doing it. Coming up on today's programme, we're heading back to Sue Kent's garden near Swansea to see how she transformed a steep, overgrown border into wonderful terraces that she can easily maintain.
This used to be a large bank, and I began to feel alienated and overwhelmed by this area of the garden, which I wasn't prepared to accept.
And we visit Joel Bird in Kent, who's experimenting with a veg garden on the roof of his shed.
There's about 15 square metres of growing space, but within that 15 square metres, I'm growing a lot of stuff.
And I will be planting a tricky little spot under a rose and doing a few jobs in a veg garden. I'm a happy boy. I'm back landscaping and building things. Actually, in reality, it's something I've been promising Mrs. Frost since we moved in here. I can remember coming to visit and her stopping exactly this spot. And we were lucky enough to get that lovely view of the church in the village. And I promised her that at some point I would build this lovely little area she could come and just sit and enjoy it. But, you know, in our gardens and design in general, we need destination points that we feel comfortable in. Also, it's a focal point. It will pull you through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plant in front of it so your table and chairs will sit on what will be a brick-edged gravel terrace. But then when you arrive, when you're in it, you know, not just the atmosphere, but then we get a link to another part of the garden. Actually, if you look over there at the verbascum and the verbena, they were self-seeded. It's like they're queuing up to get into this area. So if you imagine over the winter, I'm going to take the turf off, prep the soil, and next spring plant into here. But I've done quite a bit so far. Let's crack on. Before I start this, I think we should talk about levels. This is on what seems a slight slope. If you look at the back there, the top of that peg will be finished level, so at the back of my terrace, it'll more or less look like a brick edge. But as we work across and we get to the front there, that's going to be sticking out the ground by nearly a foot. So I'm going to plant that, which will soften the view through, and you're going to come round the terrace, and then that will be the natural step. And that will help with the design because it will draw you into the garden. Once I dug out, I put a series of level pegs all the way round, just using the spirit level, just to make sure that everything is perfectly level. And then my concrete mix. That is a really wet concrete mix. I use 10 parts ballast to 1 part cement. Once that's done, leave it for a couple of days to go off, and then you can start building. But what's lovely about building a circular terrace is you've got a pin in the middle, and if you imagine scribing, you've got a big compass. You just use that central pin, and you can draw all the way around. And you'll see here what I've done is I've tied a little knot just where I want the bricks to finish. The first thing you want to do is get your mortar mix. So the mortar mix is made from soft sand and cement. And what I've done, this is a 5-to-1, so 5 sand and 1 cement. So what you do then is just bed that first brick on. And all I'm looking to do is use the string central right through the centre of the brick and making sure it's square. Once I've done that, you've never done this before, it's not a bad idea just to use a tiny little boat level just to make sure that you're nicely level both ways. It might seem like a lot of work, but I do promise you, when you start doing this, it is not only good fun, but when you finish, it's quite satisfying. So once I get so far, I then just start to use the bigger spirit level. So what I'll do is I'll continue to work my way all the way round. And just so you can see, when I come and then put the next course on top, that's just going to sit halfway over that brick. And then at the front there, you imagine I'm going to have a retaining wall, and at the back, it'll look like just a little sort of brick edge. But I'm going to do that over the next couple of weeks. I don't know if you remember earlier on the season, we called up with a lady called Sue Kent from Caswell Bay near Swansea. And she was born with an upper limb difference, not that that stops her gardening. And she's a lady that has definitely got her head round levels and made them work for her and her garden.
I really enjoy gardening, but there's a lot of jobs and it can be quite tiring. So I'm trying to design my garden to minimalise the effort that it takes to do things. So I put a lot of thought into making life easier so that I can enjoy it and it not be a chore. I've had this 3/4 of an acre garden for 31 years, but it's not always looked like this. This used to be a large bank. And weeding on a slope is quite difficult when you're standing on one foot and doing it with your toes. And I began to feel alienated and overwhelmed by this area of the garden, which I wasn't prepared to accept. I decided to do something radical, to start again by rethinking and redesigning this garden area to suit me and how I garden. I was inspired by a visit to Powys Castle and Gardens, which is in North Wales. And they had this long, thin, terraced walkway. And I thought I could redesign the bank to become a series of terraces that would be just wide enough for me to be able to reach with my feet to weed. And it's worked really well. I terraced the whole upper end of the garden, giving myself 4 new terraces divided by pathways. I've designed these beds so that they are not too deep, so I can reach always to the back of it and weed the whole area. I've put a cockleshell mulch on, which helps to suppress the weeds, and underneath the mulch is some membrane. This makes it really easy in terms of low maintenance, but I love the cockleshells. They tie in with being so close to the beach. I chose 5 key plants to run through the seasons to give me interest. And I've repeated them symmetrically throughout this border. And I find that the repeating pattern of them is very calming. On my top terrace, I've got block planting of hydrangeas, which I love. They're so big and bold. They really fill the space and act as a lovely foil to the blue agapanthus. And they have a sort of double function, so they're beautiful now, but I like to pick the heads and dry them. So in winter, I can remember what a lovely sight this is in the summer, and it brings me joy. The agapanthus are the star of the show here. I'm really lucky I'm right by the coast and the weather's very mild. So I'm able to grow the deciduous and the evergreen varieties. And it's quite a dry, well-drained terrace, and they love it here. Yes, they can be a bit unruly and they fall over into the Shasta daisies below and mix in with them, but it's a really beautiful landscape. The Shasta daisies, they come and then they go, and so I've interplanted them with variegated and plain yuccas to give me a sort of interest all the year round. This is Spirea white gold. It's flowered and it's looking a bit sorry for itself now, so I'm going to remove the flowers right back to the new green growth, and it'll change colour. This one's quite green, you can see, and this one is a more of a yellowy colour. So I've got this lovely long-handled special tool, which I use and has changed my life. So this is like a long-handled pair of secateurs, and it chops really well for me, and the great thing is you can swivel the handle around like this so you can get to wherever you want to do. It's quite a therapeutic job if you take your time. I don't mind being slow. It means I can do it myself. And, you know, I like sort of shaping bushes. These spireas, they can grow 1 metre wide and 1 metre tall. But if they got that big, I wouldn't be able to cope with them. So I'm cutting them into a mound, and when they're more formalised like that, the vibrance of the agapanthus comes alive more. So I like to do that at this time of year so I can really enjoy my agapanthus. So the joy of using just a few plants means I've only got a bit of knowledge on each of them to remember. They each only need tending once a year, but they give such beautiful, symmetrical repetition that I feel I'm getting a lot of bang for my bucks. In between my 5 perennials, I usually plant 1 annual to keep it simple. And this year it's Cosmos Purity. It was supposed to be my daughter's wedding in September, but it's been postponed. So now I have a lot of white Cosmos to deadhead. Deadheading helps them to thicken up and create more flowers. But also I'm going to take the deadheads and take the flowers for the house, and this will encourage even more flowers. When I buy plants from the nursery, they sometimes arrive quite small, and if I put them in the ground, I often lose them. So this year, I'm going to try something different. So I'm going to put them in here and allow them to grow on a bit. So I devised a way of separating them. I got 2 bits of builder's plastic, then I put it into my pot, filled each one separately, and I've potted them on, and these 4 plants, hopefully, because I've never done this before, the roots will stay separate so that when I want to transfer them next year, I'll be able to easily separate them. The reason why I've painted it pink is because all these are going to be in a new pink border, but in the winter they're all going to die back. I'm going to forget what I put in here. So I've painted it pink so that I know that these are the pink flowers for the pink border. I think by taking the time to really consider the design in my garden, I've allowed myself for it not to become so much of a chore, but a real enjoyment. And I'm really proud of the way it's delivered with such impact. So I really feel I've earned my sort of wings as a bit of a homemade garden designer.
Sue, I thought your garden was absolutely beautiful. But the other thing I loved about Sue is the fact that she wasn't just accepting shrubs for what they are. I think there's a time and a place, if you've got the space, just to let plants do what they do. And I'm down here in the woodland and I'm constantly, I suppose, looking for opportunities. And I love the way the light works in here at different parts of the day. And this is a Cornus mass, and I tend to grow them as multi-stems and then under plant. But if you imagine in the winter, really wonderful yellow flower, good spring foliage, then this lovely sort of red cherry starts to develop, fantastic autumn colour. And then as it matures, the bark inside there on that stem picks up a real orange tone for it. And I noticed the other day that as the dappled light was coming underneath here, it was just picking up on the foliage. I thought if I just got in here and just started to prune out and just let some light in underneath, it would make a huge difference. When you're pruning and you're working back along a branch back into that main stem, what you're looking to do is get the secateurs at the blade side so the sharp side is right back tight against, just as there's a little sort of nugget that just comes out, and you just nip there. And then that will heal up really nicely. If you start using the secateurs the other way around and the thick part is there, you'll end up with tiny little nuggets that stick out, you know, and there's a chance of dieback and pests and diseases getting into there. So you end up with nice, neat cuts that will heal up quickly. Can probably even fit a couple more plants in. So, while I finish that off, it's time now to see the first of our home films from Your Gardens. And we're going to meet a lady called Sharon Cook from Barbados, who had her trip to the south coast slightly extended. So what did she do? She created herself a garden.
Hello, I'm Sharon. I'm in my husband's hometown of Bridpool in Dorset. This is our rented home, and when we got here there was no garden whatsoever. So, came in March, was going to be here for 2 months because I was going back to Barbados, and then of course my flight got cancelled and cancelled again, and I'm still here. So I decided to create a cottage garden with the emphasis on wildlife. Dug the beds, put in some sheep manure and planted. So we've got cornflowers, we've got nasturtiums, we have this fantastic Verbena bonariensis, which is a brilliant plant. It adds height without adding density. Butterflies and bees absolutely adore it. And we've actively planted tomatoes, 2 varieties, one called Amateur and the other one called Gardener's Delight. And Gardener's Delight is our favourite tomato. I might have planted a little bit too much because the idea was I was going to plant this year and it would be oomph next year. But I planted in March and we had so much heat in May, and then by June the garden had already gone oomph. Now I'm looking forward to getting back home in a few days.
Sharon, what I love about that is the fact I think it proves that ultimately with a little bit of hard work and not necessarily a lot of time, you can create something quite wonderful. This was this sort of little problem area that I was talking about earlier on, and we'd already put this rose against this old wall, and it's Rosa Falstaff we've clipped as a climber. But this gets very hot here. You can see by some of the flowers there, they've been scorched, you know. But on top of that, I can't make the border any wider. I think a lot of us at home deal with this. We've got a fence runs down the side of the garden. You know, we can't make our borders too wide because, you know, the smaller spaces are needed for so much more. How do we deal with that big vertical in the background? And don't be averse to getting as high up the wall as you can. But also it's thinking about the colour of that background. And I've already added the Agastache there. It's licorice blue. A good vertical plant, but it'll bring the scent and the flower looks good against that background. And then I'm looking to add plants that maybe just break the edge of this strong line. So here I've gone for Euphorbia polychroma, which give me good early colour. I've just started to repeat things and get this sense of rhythm down through the border, and you can do that in your own garden as well. And I'm just adding these last few, and this is Potentilla Monarch's Velvet. There's a textured sort of slightly palmate leaf to it. I use it quite a bit in the garden, and I think performance-wise it just keeps flowering. And then something that loves baking is this iris. So this is action front, so the flower will come up to just shy of a metre, but they're showstoppers. They're the things that just stop you in your tracks. Even if it's only for a few weeks, never plant them too deep. Clean some of the compost off and expose that rhizome. And I'm going to make sure that I face that to the sun. And I'll never bury them, because they do like to bake, and the more they bake, the more they perform for you. But even when they're not flowering, again, I've got that sort of very upright form. And the last one I'm putting in is an Artemisia. And not really for its flower, because it's not exactly showy, but grey foliage. The foliage will be there all season, and it'll bake quite happily. It will grow just probably to about 50, 60 centimetres. It will slowly sort of clump up and spread and cover the ground. If it does get a little bit untidy, you can cut it hard back to the ground and it's fine. And in fact, actually, there's a few little shoots coming at the bottom here. So I'm going to tidy that up. A couple of weeks' time, that'll fill the space. So, you know, in a sense, it's just thinking about how do we get good vertical structure, colours that are going to show well against the colour of your fence or a wall. And then you're thinking about that interest through the season. So all I'm going to have to do now is give that a really good watering in. And looking at it, it's going to be really easy to maintain. And on that note, we've now got a chance to see a film again of a man that's got an incredibly busy life, but he's created a garden that suits just that.
I'm Carl Woodfield. I live in a little village in Hampshire called Lockerley. The garden's really special to me because I spend 8 months of my life a year in a steel box, and I always buy a few plants for my cabin on board because I don't like to be the only thing growing in it. I'm a captain in the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. We operate worldwide in support of the Royal Navy. I am the only gardener in the family. My wife is bringing up 3 children. I can't ask her to take on my garden as well. So there's some fairly intensive gardening that goes on when I'm at home, but the garden fends for itself when I'm away. I've been gardening this space for about 22 years now. When we moved in, it was just concrete. I started gardening in pots, etc., but found it quite difficult because I'm away from the home for 4 months at a time. I lost a lot of plants, and I realised that I needed borders so that the plants could survive without me. It is a small space. It's about 36 square metres, and the challenge really is to make it feel bigger. And to do that, I've brought in some fairly big plants that I've grown on. So I've planted some trees in here and some large shrubs, and that helps it feel bigger, even though it's a small space. I tend to shy away from annuals and things which are too fussy and need too much maintenance. So in the garden here, I've actually grown all of my box from one plant. So all of the box you can see are cuttings and provide continuity through the garden. So there's really good winter structure in here as well. I tend to sow seeds every year when I'm at home, if I'm home at the right time. I have a greenhouse which I inherited. It's my granddad's greenhouse. It's a bit decrepit, but it's hidden up behind the garage, and it's my hidden paradise up there. Somewhere to go and escape from 3 daughters. I have quite a few hostas in the garden because they're great form and they fit in really well with the design. I obviously, suffer with slugs and snails like everybody else, but I'm lucky at the moment is I have a hedgehog which hoovers up an awful lot of slugs and snails. I've got splashes of colour in the garden throughout the year, and one of them that's out at the moment is the hydrangea Annabelle. She's got some fantastic white blooms and just adds a little bit of interest and colour, but not too much. My job is very challenging, but coming home and having this space as a green, verdant space is fantastic for me and my mental well-being. My kids say if they can't find me, they know exactly where I am. I'm out in the garden.
Carl, I think my kids would say the same about me. Where's Dad? He's in the garden. But I agree with you. For that sort of mental well-being, I'm not sure there's a better place to be on the planet. This is a new area and it's something I've been experimenting with. So what I've done with these two borders is played with the idea of maybe a cottage garden meets an ornamental kitchen garden. Because I think we don't necessarily need to grow our veggies in a separate space. We can plant fruit and vegetables even in our borders. So here I've got things like the dahlias, little nasturtiums going around. And even the ochre, it flowers and creates great little ground cover, but you can use it in the kitchen. And if you haven't got necessarily a veg garden, just into planting, it's not a bad way to go forward. And today I just want to add a little bit of coriander. It's a hardy annual. So all I've done is I've scraped out an area. You don't need a big space. And I'm just going to sow them very lightly, just making sure that there's roughly probably a couple of centimetres in between them. And now I'm going to water them. And this will just settle them into the ground. When I start now to cover those back over, they won't move. And it really is that simple. I mean, you could do coriander quite easily in a container. On a windowsill or outside the back door, it would work really well. And that's it. Keep us in coriander for most of the winter. Still to come on today's programme. Joe heads to a beautiful experimental garden on the edge of Dartmoor in Devon that mixes plants and planting styles from all over the world. And I'll be adding some grasses to the rose walk. And now we've got to meet a fella who does not want to waste an inch of his own space.
I think of myself as a bit of a veg shed man. Really, I spend more time in that garden space than I do in the house. Sometimes I wonder why I've got a house. I'm Joel Baird. This is my garden, which is in Margate. I live here with my family, 2 small children. And I designed the garden to try and accommodate all of our needs. One of the main things is to try and grow crops, but since it was so small, I decided to lift the footprint of the shed, which is my studio, put the allotment on top of the roof. The shed is something that I built, it's bespoke, so I designed it with the roof in mind. I bought the structure because you have to make sure that the thickness of these roof joists is strong enough to take the soil, so that's quite important. But the rest of it, recycled wood, like for example, the staircase was going to go into a skip. There was a shed here originally, so I ripped that shed down and I used that cladding to clad the insides of the shed. That's just the way I live. I've always lived like that, you know, trying to just pick things up and put them into builds. This is where I grow all kinds of fruit and vegetables. There's about 15 square meters of growing space, but within that 15 square meters, I'm growing a lot of stuff. We don't have any fences up here, but we're careful about not going too close to the edge. And the raised beds act as a kind of barrier. I think of the garden as a garden in the sky, really. It's a very, very hot space, especially on a day like today. It's getting the sun constantly, but that's a good thing in terms of the veg. It's quite exposed up here. You've got a gap between the houses and you get a lot of wind coming through that gap, especially because it's a coastal town. So that's one of the problems, but I've put a bank of grasses at the front, miscanthus, bamboo and the old Stipa giganta. The idea is that's going to break up the wind. So today I'm going to do a little bit of harvesting like I always do. These potatoes here will be going straight into the pot later. When I first planted the potatoes, the original idea was that I wanted to grow my own scouse. Scouse is a Liverpool stew, really. Actually, scouses are named after the food scouse. So I always put me potatoes in my scouse. It's part of our life. Everyone in Liverpool eats scouse when they're growing up. It's quite important for me personally to try and be, you know, as self-sufficient as I can. It's part of my life, really. I've always been an artist, a musician, things like that. So it was always about trying to save money and live frugally. It keeps our shopping bill down. We've got some cucumbers here. Actually, they've done really well. It was a bit of an experiment, really. They struggled at first because they grew quite high, but we had some strong winds come in, 40, 50 mile an hour, and the leaves took a bit of a battering. But I've put some grasses to try and protect them, and I've found if I can just get them off the ground but keep them at a lower level, then they came back to life and they've done really well. The fennel here creates a little bit of height, and this handles the winds pretty well, you know, because it will sway in the wind. So this is the herb garden. I've got mint. This is yarrow. So I often use the mint and yarrow to make a mint and yarrow tea. We've got thyme, sage and oregano. You see the scabious just popping out here. I always have flowers interspersed between the herbs. I try to create a bit of a highway for the bees to travel through the whole garden, really. And so along the way, they're going to be pollinating. This is a great place for the herbs. They like free drainage. They like to be out in the open. I put the herbs at this end of the roof because this is the driest part of the roof because the gradient takes the water to the front, and I know they can handle it. I have the irrigation system, and that filters through into a gutter and then it eventually ends up in the fish pond. Really, I'm just trying to not waste water. Part of the joy of gardening to me is definitely the nature. I could probably be more prolific if I waged war on the snails and the aphids, but I'm not interested in that. I like to see the butterflies laying their eggs on the crops, that's fine. So it's always been part of the philosophy for me is not to have a perfect garden. The family obviously loved the garden. It became apparent in the lockdown that this space just became so valuable to us. And I found that we instinctively congregated around the shed, around that garden space. We found in the end that we were spending all day out here. I think people sometimes just forget that they can have a garden anywhere. If you can grow plants in pots, then you can use any space to have a garden. And my rooftop is one of those examples. I often go on the what I call the deadhead stroll, where Those few hours at the end of the day is a nice peaceful time for me. I'm quite lucky because the sun goes down in the gap between the houses and I can watch the sunset over the sea.
Hey, you good boy. That's right. You want to come and say hello. Joe, this cat seems to love this veg garden. Joe, I thought that roof garden was fantastic, but I love the idea of recycling. Funnily enough, these beds, my last Chelsea garden, 2015, these were on the roof. But if you look at the 9 steel beds, they're all shy of a square metre. And it's a bit mind-blowing as to how much veg you can actually grow in a very small space. And we're constantly rotating this all the time. And beetroots have been really good this year, but I love this stuff roasted. I'm taking the bigger beetroots out and just leaving some of the smaller ones just to keep forming. Take one more out of there. And I reckon that'll do us. Actually, there's another job I can do while we're in here. And it's uncover these carrots. They were covered up because of carrot fly, but now, this time of year, we haven't got to worry. That life cycle of the laying of the eggs is now hopefully gone. And these are all Autumn King. So again, they've grown as a block, and I'll probably enjoy these for Christmas dinner. I'm going to show you something now. We don't know how well it's done, but can you remember back earlier on in the year when we were planting in containers? I found this old tub, put the hessian in, and we sowed these carrots. But now we're just going to see what they're like. They're called Purple Haze, so hopefully they'll be purple to start with. But let's just have a look what they're like size-wise. Actually, I'm really pleased with those. See, size does not matter when it comes to carrots. Can you see the joy on my face? I thought that was going to be even more embarrassing than that. I'm going to save those for a special occasion. And there was something else I put in earlier on in the year as well. I planted this standard gooseberry, and I've got a few around the garden, and they've been fantastic. They give some structure, but they're fruited fantastically. I think with gooseberries as well, you know, we think they've got that sour taste, and there's not. There's a sweetness to that. And for me, the key is leaving them on the plant as long as possible and letting them really ripen. So there you go. That's the last of my gooseberries for this year. I'm not even sure I'm going to share them. Now we've got a chance to see another one of your wonderful films, and it's from a lady called Rowena Birch, and I think she's given her neighbours possibly the most wonderful gift you ever could, a garden.
I'm Rowena, and I live here in a red brick terrace house built in 1870 in Manchester. My garden spans the back of 4 terraced houses. Originally, the land was owned by 3 brothers who were in their 70s and hadn't been able to do anything with it for many years. So I asked them if I could start growing things on it. They were so pleased that someone was using the land that they gave it to me. It's become a garden that everyone in our whole row of terraces comes in and enjoys.
The kids have had a place to go and to run around. The garden's beautiful. It's given them like a little oasis.
So this is where the old playhouse used to be. As you can see, we've replaced it with this pagoda that we've made. I just love the fact that the plants were already climbing all over it. Great new place for us in the garden to enjoy. Old shed, raised bed. This is a new way I'm trying for growing my vegetables. Underneath, at the bottom, we've put a whole lot of logs and twigs, and then covered it with a whole lot of green stuff, green plants. On top of that, there was some manure, then some old soil, and on the very top, I put some compost out of a bag and I've planted into it. And I think the idea is you compost as it's As it's breaking down, it produces more heat, which gives a nice warm place for my plants to grow, and it's also putting nutrients back into the soil all the time. I love coming out into the garden, somewhere every day something's a bit different. It's a place where I can come and relax. I really love the fact that my neighbours come out and enjoy it too.
Rowena, that's an incredibly kind thing to do. I've watched that, and the best thing to say is actually I just feel warm inside, and the garden was really beautiful as well. It's lovely to see a community using a space. Each year in the veg garden, I've always got an experiment going on, so I'm trying to grow something new. And this year it's this. It's called Melba spinach, or climbing spinach. Actually, in reality, it's not even a spinach, but it does taste like one. I grew this from seed. It went really well in the greenhouse, quite easy. Grew them on into probably about 1 litre pots, and then potted them up with 3 plants in quite a large container, and just grew them up the canes and created a little wigwam. And we've been feeding from this, I reckon, best part of 8 weeks. The key is not to let it flower. The moment you let it flower, the leaves start to taste quite bitter. But you have to keep on top of it, otherwise it starts to cover your cucumber. So this is all I do, just come in, give it a bit of a tidy up. If I taste one of the leaves, one of the smaller ones, it's thicker than a spinach leaf, but it's got that real spinachy flavour to it. So, if you've got a greenhouse next year, why not give it a go? Because that, for me, is what gardening's all about. It's just one big experiment. And now we've got a chance to watch again a visit Joe made to a garden in Devon that takes experimentation to a whole new, different level.
Over the years, I've heard wonderful things about Wildside. Now, the visionary behind it is Keith Wiley, and he's said to be taking gardening to the next level.
15 years ago, Keith and his wife Ros began the transformation of 4 acres of land in Devon into a garden that can only be described as extraordinary.
I like that plant before, but it looks good there.
It's how you use them, isn't it?
Well, it is. Keith, how would you describe Wildside?
The idea when we first came down here was to try and make a habitat that would suit as many plants as we could possibly grow from all over the world and make them find a place that was happy. Because I think that a beautiful plant is one that is happy, not necessarily a rarity. It's the way plants grow in communities rather than as individual plants. That's what excites me.
And what was this garden like when you first came here?
It was a completely flat field. I mean, when you get down to the bottom and look over the hedge, you'll see a field that's exactly the same as this one was. Probably over the course of the last 14 years, moved about 125,000 tonnes of soil and stone. I mean, I said to Ros when we came down here, if we could raise the level of the field by 4 feet.
That's a bit over 4 feet.
Well, we went higher than we anticipated. It ended up going 25 feet above the original level. And 15 feet deeper as well. But that's, you know, that's just fun.
And what's the inspiration behind it?
There are places that remind me of places that we've been on holiday, like Crete or South Africa or the Mediterranean or New Mexico. And it's almost like you put them into a blender and you come up with a smoothie version. It's a sort of reminder of all of them, but not a copy of any of them. That's what I like, it's that emotional connection, and try and capture some tiny essence of that back here at Wildside.
It's not what the great British public would see as normal gardening. I mean, you are trying to break barriers, you're trying to experiment, you're trying to push the boundaries of what a garden is here.
Yes, but only because I want to see it myself. I want to do these things because I know they haven't been done and I want to see them. That's the driver.
Yeah.
That's what makes me want to do it.
Looking back now,
We're not starting again.
no, looking back now over the last, whatever, 14,
Yeah.
15 years, you know, would you do it all over again?
Well, yes, because it's as we dreamed. The dream has become a reality and has the possibility for being something truly, truly memorable.
The range of plants in this garden is simply phenomenal. And it's because Keith has created different aspects and environments for them to thrive in. Here we have a lush palette of plants, plants that thrive with their roots down in the wet soil. So things like the royal fern, hostas, ligularias, regersias, and then shots of colour coming from things like the candelabra primula and the little primula vialii as well. It's just genius. The level changes that Keith put in has done really interesting things for the planting. So on this bank, we've got lots of low-growing plants, which would, if they were just in the border, be pretty much below knee level. You'd be looking down on top of them. But on a bank, we see it in a very different way. The tapestry of plants at eye level. So we've got lots of daisy flowers in here, things like the Mexican fleabane, the oxeye daisy, and there's even a lovely Californian poppy here, a little pop of orange down at the bottom. And then your eye is led up towards this fantastic Japanese maple. And throughout the garden, Keith has planted a lot of the trees on the top of these banks. So it feels as if they're towering over you. You're looking up into the canopy of the tree. As well as being a fabulous collection of plants, this garden goes beyond that. It's been wonderfully designed and some of the compositions are just exquisite. In this area, which is roughly based on the Mediterranean, it's got, you know, arid, dry, loving plants. We see a fabulous composition here. If you turn this border into a black and white photo and you look at it that way, it will tell you if it works or not, really. So we've got structural plants, we've got things of form and plenty of texture and depth as well to that composition. And then when we come back into full colour, it works nicely too. So we've got things like the Lychnis coronaria with the magenta flowers and the silvery foliage, which pick up on the silvery foliage of the nicely clipped Santalinas behind me, drawing the eye nicely through. And then this wonderful grass, this Nicella that he's dotted in everywhere, just loosens the whole planting scheme up, makes it far more naturalistic. I've seen a lot of gardens over the years, and I have to say, I think this is a hugely significant garden. You can see that Keith has taken his inspiration from the natural landscape, but created this sort of stylized dreamscape, incorporating so many different plants from all over the world, but putting them together with an artist's eye. But most importantly, the lesson I'll take from here is his sense of experimentation. I was really excited about seeing this garden in the first place, and it certainly didn't disappoint.
Keith, that man, it's not just a passion, is it, for that landscape? It's a man that understands his craft, and you get the sense that there's a relationship with those plants. And it's made me think a lot about this place and what I'm trying to do here long term. And this hedge became a problem. It was so predominant of the space, though it's got a lovely shape to it, it sort of overpowered everything. So I was looking for things that were just tall and quite sort of thin in a way, and that's what led me to the grasses. And it amazes me a bit with grasses because there seems to be two camps. You know, anytime you talk about them, people either love them or they hate them. And for me, they're an incredible group of plants. They bring sound, movement, peace. They play with light. And for me, they can really bring a garden alive. But there's a rhythm all the way down through. I've got panicums that start at that end. I've got things like calamagrostis and Melinias that come back, and they've met in this sort of central space. So Adrutina is the first thing that I'm going to put in. It's called chocolate, as you can probably see from the foliage. And the reason that I'm adding it is exactly that. The foliage starts right from the bottom of that plant. Later on in the summer, it has a little sort of fizzy white flower, but it's that foliage that I love. And yeah, it's not a grass, but it's going in because it's a great plant to plant against. It'll get to about 1.4, 1.5 metres, something like that. Takes sun or semi-shade, any good sort of reasonable soil. So because we're planting the time of year that we are, I am still adding a little bit of organic matter. For me, that is manure. It'll just help not only the root system, but it will help hold the moisture in around that plant. It's definitely worth giving everything a really good soak. Just loosen the roots up. So I'm going to add sort of 3 of these. Holes about twice the size of the root ball. The next one I'm adding is Miscanthus. This is Miscanthus malepartus. But I'm adding it for a couple of reasons, really. It's got a lovely sort of dark undertone, which will read off that Adrutina. It'll get to about 1.8 tall, but it's got this real sort of rich purple, feathery flower head on it. They do hold their form incredibly well through the winter. So that's that one in. I hope by the end of this, you that don't like those grasses, maybe just give them a little bit of a rethink, because I promise you, you won't regret it. So that goes in. So, the next thing I've got to do is just add this little Melica. This is Melica ultrapurpurea. You can see the colour of those little flowers. I picked that up on the Adrutina. But it's small. It'll grow to about 2 foot. Clump up, probably about the same. Let's get these last couple in. Just place that in. So I think the final one can just go in there. So there you go. I'll just give those a good water, keep an eye on them over the next few months, and just enjoy them all the way through to next year. Now, we're off to the United States of America to meet a viewer that's been inspired by probably one of our greatest gardeners.
Hi, I'm Sherry Willwright from Northern Utah. I want to show you what I've been doing the last few months while we've been spending a lot more time at home. But first I wanted to thank Gardener's World for everything that you've taught me. A few years ago, you had a program which highlighted Beth Chatto's gravel garden. And I was very inspired by that garden and wanted to incorporate a gravel garden to my own plot of land. Living in a place where the summers are very hot and dry, it really inspired me that she had never watered that garden. What I did was divide and transplant many of our plants from other areas, focusing on water-wise plants like yarrow or sedum, some coneflowers, some catmint, and different kinds of sages. It appears to already be a success because from the initial transplant and after the first watering, I've only watered the garden once. I also incorporated the irrigation canal into the design by placing rocks and then forming a type of crevice garden for alpines. It really improves the look of the canal, and it's incorporated with the rest of the gravel garden. I have plenty more to show you. When you get a chance, you could come visit. Maybe not just yet. Thanks, Gardener's World. Stay safe and stay home and garden.
Sherry, thank you very much, and I couldn't agree with you more about spending more time at home in the garden. And if you do, just every now and then, something completely magical happens, all right? You have a look at this. Going in and out of there is a leafcutter bee. Look closely at the roses. You can see the cuts out of the leaves. Don't worry about those if you've got them. That's a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. I only built that bee hotel about a month ago. I did not think for one moment it would be used this year. Isn't that incredible? So you know what I'll be doing this weekend? I'm going to make a load more of these and fix them to all these sunny posts. Just remember to make sure the holes are deep. Mine are well over 4 inches long and have smooth sides. But if you don't fancy doing that, here's a few more jobs you might want to do at the weekend. Onions are ready to harvest as soon as the tops start to fall over and die back. Using a fork, carefully lift them out the ground, taking care not to damage them in the process. Dry somewhere airy until they turn brown and crispy. I'm laying them out on some old chicken wire, just like my granddad used to do. This is a good time of year to take stock of your borders and decide what needs moving or dividing later on. You can take notes or photographs, but the system that works well for me is sticking bamboo canes into the soil with a note reminding me what to do. If your strawberries are healthy and sending out runners, now's the time to propagate them if you want more plants. Using a piece of wire or a steel peg, pin each one down into a small pot filled with soil or compost. Keep well watered to promote good root growth, and within a few weeks you'll have new plants that can be severed from the parent. Well, we're nearly at the end of the show, but before you go, I need to show you something. Have a look at this, look. That's Calycanthus aphrodite. I'm growing that shrub in a container at the moment, but I'm going to find a sheltered little spot up in the gravel garden, and that'll be one of the stars. But that is for next year. Do you remember this? I planted this white Korean mint back at Easter. Look how well it's done. But pick a couple of those leaves, drop them in hot water. Tastes fantastic. Mind you, even better in the mornings. Remember, it's a really good hangover cure. Anyway, that is enough from me. Monty will be back next week at Longmeadow at 8 o'clock. In the meantime, look after yourselves. Bye-bye.